Muffords. Tonight we're finishing the Sturmtiger with the application of earth tones and other weathering effects. The painting stand would get in our way because the best place to start is on the lower hull. As usual, the first layer is mud texture with this acrylic terrain paste from AK. The workflow is totally straightforward. You apply it with an old brush and then blend it with water. It dries relatively quickly, and if you're not careful, it can leave visible stains on the surface, so it's always essential to work swiftly. Personally, I always find this step intimidating because until this point, pretty much every technique was delicate, required precision and skill, and suddenly I'm just slapping thick mud all over the place. You can see that the paste is quite opaque as well, and it seems like I'm covering up all the previous effects, but luckily, once the colored water evaporates, the intensity won't be so brutal. Once I realized this, the process became much easier. Let's now refine the result with enamel dust tones. For this model, I wanted a grayish earth color, so I mixed all my earth tones with a bit of gray wash for interiors. You'll be surprised, or maybe you won't, but this step is basically the same thing, but instead of mud paste and water, we're using enamel paint and thinner. Most of the time I apply a basic outline of the dust layer with an airbrush, a so-called pre-dusting technique, but in this case, I felt like it wasn't really necessary. Lower hull and running gear is the easiest place to start because these areas are usually out of sight and covered in lots of dirt. So if something goes south, chances are nobody will see it, and if you accidentally go overboard, it's probably still gonna look realistic. Now I mixed a darker earth tone using the same grayish recipe. It was at this point when I realized that the lower hull on this model is really out of sight. So much that it's actually hard to film it comfortably, so instead I'll just show you the process on the wheels. With this layer, we're not necessarily simulating fresh mud, it's more like a color variation game. Just so the layers of earth are more visually interesting. As such, the darker tone should always cover a smaller area compared to the previous layer. I like to focus these effects mainly where the biggest clumps of earth are located, and also around corners and details. It's important to keep it random and don't apply the same patterns and amounts on every wheel. Finally, we'll add a bit of dark wash for extra visual punch. Again, the ambiguity of these effects gives us a lot of creative freedom. On one hand, a dark color like this can imitate pools of oil leaking from the wheel hubs, and on the other, it enhances the contrast and the deep shadows. But because the Sturmtiger has been sitting still for a while, I wanted to point it out with a bit of visual storytelling. So I painted a few streaks of oil running straight down, following gravity. You must have noticed the grey outer rims at this point, and I did that with an acrylic paint. To stay efficient, I painted these while the thinner from the darker earth color was evaporating. This is a part of another storytelling detail. Steel wheels get polished to an absolutely insane sheen by friction, but the moment the vehicle has been standing still for a while, this shiny metallic surface starts to rust. And it's not any kind of rust, it's that fresh, orange kind of rust. You can see it in real life on car brakes, for example. And to finish things off, I enhanced the streaks of oil one more time, this time with a pointy paintbrush and diluted acrylics. Enamels are great for smooth blending, but for opaque layers or sharp and thin lines, acrylics are just easier to use. With these two major parts of the model complete, we can assemble the wheels and move on to the tracks. Track. The weathering effects were the same, but the application is much easier. Tracks are in direct contact with the ground, so they're often completely covered in dirt. What made the process more interesting, though, was the imitation of fresh rust. I tried to finish the track in one session, and because of that, I could use the longer drying time of each layer to my advantage. I simply wiped the earth effects away from the cleats and the inner sides of the links, exposing the dark gray acrylic base color. This works as a perfect foundation for rust, So, just like on the wheels, every surface that would otherwise be polished to insane levels received a thick coat of fresh rust wash instead. To enhance the variation on such large surfaces, I applied a bit of acrylic dark rust using a sponge. Sometimes I find it impossible to balance the finish on the tracks and the rest of the model, and the only approach that helps is to just put them on the model and then apply the finishing touches. This way I can focus only on what's gonna be visible, and it's much easier to see what needs to be done and where it should be done. Alright, let's check out the results so far. One would say that the model is finished at this point, but we still have the upper surfaces. The running gear makes up about a third of a tank, so it should be painted with care, but at the same time, I often use it as a test bed to see what's gonna work on the model. And right off the bat, we'll start with a pretty exciting technique. Natural scatter, because the real tank was covered with straw and dry grass. Sifted gardening substrate and dried seagrass from AK are the perfect materials for the job, and I'll glue them in place with VMS ballast freeze and tap water. Seagrass already has beautiful color, so all we need to do is just to cut it to the appropriate length. This is a technique I haven't used as much in recent history, and it's a shame because this might be one of the most transformative weathering methods, and one that adds the most lifelike look to the model. I've read countless times in my comments that I should use alcohol to break the surface tension, so now I thought, hey, why not try it out? And just like I said in the past, it's never a good idea to flood a painted model surface with such a strong concoction. It works great in dioramas, but not on models. Check out the damage it caused to the paint job. It went right down to the primer without me even touching the surface. Well, now at least I have physical proof and you don't have to take my word for it. Besides, I can say that this step is utterly pointless because modern scenic glues are formulated really well. VMS ballast freeze already has pretty low surface tension, so it flows easily and saturates the scatter like it's nothing, and because it's purely acrylic, it won't attack the surface. This means you can saturate the scatter and then move it around until you're satisfied. The only important thing is to blend it all with tap water and soak up the excess as much as you can, otherwise the glue can dry into visible blobs and that never looks good. Still, it's the best system I ever tried, and you'll see what I mean in a moment. No matter how well you blend it, every glue will leave some kind of residue. In this case, it's an extremely wet-looking shiny surface, but luckily it has no volume, so it's easy to rectify with VMS flat varnish. This is what I meant by the system, because these two products lead to absolutely breathtaking results, and you can get them at a lower price following the links and coupons in the video description. A quick blast with the flat varnish, and all of that sheen is gone. The scatter looks like it might fall off at any moment, but it's held in place and it's rock hard. Another advantage of this system is that it's completely resistant against enamel paints and thinners, and this means we can comfortably integrate the natural scatter into our weathered finish. Using the same paint mixtures as on the lower hull, I'm using these piles as a visual guide for my weathering. If I'm unsure about the amount, layout or intensity of the earth effects, one thing is certain. I can start around the piles of natural debris and then expand the effects further. It all depends on your personal style and your intentions, of course. The weathering could be done in a much subtler way if we focused it just on those piles, but I like to apply these effects in a more balanced way across the entire model. Different surfaces require different blending methods, and sometimes we can even employ specialized brushes for the job. And lastly, it's important to give at least this first layer several hours to dry, because if we don't wait, the different paints will get mixed together into a giant, chaotic mess. On the other hand, we can use that to our advantage. I've already shown you the wet blending method with acrylic paints multiple times, but something similar can be done with enamels as well. If the paint isn't fully cured, or even better, the thinner hasn't evaporated, we can add the darker paints on top of it. We just have to be very careful, use smaller brushes, and apply the effects in small quantities because there's a very fine line between the chaotic mess and a well-controlled finish. My goal here was again a tank that hasn't been used for a few days. This meant no glossy fresh stains of oil on the engine deck, no shiny metallic edges, just dirt that settled on the surface. These weathering steps are when I usually start to doubt my approach and I'm never sure about the final result. It often feels quite discouraging to me, but after finishing so many models, I know that if the enthusiasm is replaced by hesitation, it's best to just power through the process and get it done. Hesitation and overthinking never leads to anything good, at least in my case. As I said the last time, the fresh impacts on the back are the last thing that happened to this tank, and as such, they can't be muted by the earth tones. So I quickly refreshed them with rusty acrylics and also polished the edges with graphite so they look metallic and draw more attention. The bucket that you saw is a 3D print from Spalach models, and I kept it as the final detail. It's visible in the historical photos, and I went for a pale, galvanized finish with a bit of weathering. The basic paint job was stippled with grey and white acrylics, earth colors were also applied with diluted acrylics, and only the rust tones are painted with oils. Finally, there's a detail I really wanted to include. The Oberempt Sturmtiger was salvaged and sent to the School of Tank Technology for evaluation, and sometime during the process, the soldiers added their signatures. These are visible on the tank after it was shipped out of Germany, but who says it wasn't signed while it was still stuck in that ditch in the German town? So I included them, of course. Hand-painted lettering is a discipline all on its own, and I'm not very good at it, but what works for me is to often start writing from the last letter and go from right to left. This way I can be sure that the words will fit and I won't run out of space. Also, for a nice opaque finish, at least 2 layers of paint are often necessary. And if I make a mistake or some of the shapes are not pretty, a toothpick can be used for quick adjustments. I think it's just a cute way of preserving history. And with that, the Sturmtiger is finished, my friends. This model has everything. Steel textures, photo edge, handmade Simmerit, interior in the fighting compartment, weathering. I mean, the only thing it doesn't have is the missing track. I'll be honest, the model felt quite overwhelming at times, and once I finished it, it was a huge relief. In fact, let me know if you feel the same way. Like, usually when I'm getting close to the finish line, I start doubting my approach and overthinking everything, which often leads to me just sitting at the workbench, looking at the model, and doing pretty much nothing productive. As I mentioned, the best solution for me is to force myself to stop caring and just plow through the process, even if it feels not wrong, but not right. Do you ever get that feeling? Let me know. Anyway, this model is gonna be in a large diorama, and that's what I'm gonna focus on now. One part of the puzzle is done, more pieces to go. Until then, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you found this video interesting. I wouldn't be able to run my channel full-time without my patrons. Their help allows me to sneak out of my house during the night and collect real earth, not just from my garden, but from the sidewalk as well. And if you're one of them, thank you so much, because if it weren't for you, I wouldn't be making these videos full-time. My Patreon is honestly the best place where only the coolest kids hang out. I post regular updates there, share work-in-progress photos, various thoughts and observations from the workbench, and we keep in touch through DMs, comments, and emails. Top-tier patrons get early access to all of my videos completely ad-free, and they stay there forever. So if you like listening to them while you're at the workbench, like some kind of night shift podcast, that's the best place to go. There are also bonus extras like 3D printable parts for your projects, reference photos from real-life locations, and high-resolution studio shots of my models that show way more detail than video ever could. Your financial support is appreciated, but never expected. The next part of this diorama is gonna be another vehicle, but I won't tell you what it's gonna be. only that it'll be small and much quicker to build and paint. And remember, build your models, don't just hoard them. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers!